Hello everyone, thank you very much indeed for joining us for this webinar tonight on success in English. The aim of the presentation this evening is to make sure that parents and carers are aware of the requirements of the English GCSE and that we have the opportunity to discuss some revision strategies and also ask some questions at the end of the session. So tonight's session is going to be monitored by Anna Lacey, who will also be able to take questions with us at the end. If you feel like emailing a question directly to the college instead of hanging online to do that at the end of the session, then that's absolutely fine. I don't believe I can see all the attendees on the attendee list, so I don't know whether we've got 5 or 6 people or 20 or 30 people, but anyway, good evening and thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your schedule. If you can't hear me and you can communicate that through an email to one of us, that would be great. So first things first, I would like to have a look at the context. So on the slides here, we can see that mock results have just been released and students are, as always is the case, a range of different emotions. Some have done very well, some have done as expected, and some have perhaps dipped a little bit. And certainly the mock exam results that I've analysed suggest that on average in English, the bottom line is that we're about a grade below where we want students to be. Now, 1 grade's difference between now and the summer season and the results is certainly achievable. And we want to put in place as much as possible so that we can encourage students to achieve their potential. I've taught for 18 years now, and certainly the team of teachers we have at West Somerset College in the English department are as good as any I've ever worked with, if not better. They're a really, really strong team with a lot of experience. The subject knowledge is superb and their practicing is second to none. And in spite of that, we are finding a little bit of resistance to kind of hard work and kind of going that extra mile with some of our students in the classroom. And it may be that I'm not speaking to the right parents here, but I think everybody can put that little bit of extra in, and I think this is the time to do that, particularly at home as well as in the classroom. However, student body who have been affected by the COVID era, as I've called it, there's certainly been some disruption to their learning in year 9, but we've put in place as much as possible to make sure that anything they've missed over that period of time has been provided for and gaps have been filled. And certainly at Parents' Evening this week, I've met with a number of parents who feel that there are still gaps, that we're now working really, really hard to make sure that those small gaps are filled. And also on the next slide, I thought it would be useful just to see how many different things we're actually doing. So here's a little list of the things that the college has put in place, specifically for English and for other subjects as well. So we run an after-school English, I was going to say club. It's a session, it's a lecture, it's a workshop, and it's run normally by 2 teachers, sometimes just by 1. But we run that in the Sixth Form Centre now every Wednesday afternoon for about an hour. And everybody's invited to that. And the general feedback from students is very, very positive. We also run a Get Ahead in English session that runs every Wednesday, and I'm running that this half term. If you go onto the website, we'll talk about that a little bit later and give you an example, but the recordings are available for those that aren't attend in person. Revision booklets, many of you will have picked up revision booklets. They're produced in-house and they're available. If you haven't picked one up, please do so. They have homework tasks and they're specifically designed to ensure that students are targeting the right questions. Knowledge organisers on our website are still available. Please make use of them. They do have the core knowledge, the kind of top 10% of knowledge that we really need students to know in order to access those exams. The English department are running morning mastery every Wednesday. Wednesday seems to be the English day for everything. So Wednesday morning in assembly, we have a set of kind of practical lectures, if you like. So students are in the exam environment, but they're being taken through advice and with a chance to practice as well. Study guides are available in department. If you feel like your son or daughter perhaps needs a study guide support for a specific text, Jekyll and Hyde, Macbeth, please ask. We will have spare copies that they can take away and borrow for the exam season. Online tutoring exists for certain targeted students. And Anna Ross, who is an alumni of the college, is working with groups and doing one-to-one mentoring, and she is superb. Please let me know if that one-to-one support or the small group support that we have some capacity for is of interest. I know that that was some feedback that had come through the survey. We have subscriptions to a number of online platforms, the best of which, Seneca and Massolit, are completely free of charge for students to access and parents to access, for that matter. So you have the ability to use Seneca and use Massolit and access that material. Massolit's brilliant. It's full of kind of short but very, very precise videos, 8 to 10 minutes long, on each of the set texts and each of the set poems. So please use Massolit and Seneca. We can provide feedback through those forums too. I know that the teachers in the team are providing one-to-one feedback from the mock exams. So whether you feel like you've done really, really well, or you're a little bit disappointed, that one-to-one feedback is provided, and that one-to-one feedback is provided for all students. So please let me know if that's not happened. We also have a website which is updated regularly and includes lots and lots of resources, and it's at that address there on the screen. This PowerPoint, by the way, I'll send out. It may be that a number of parents aren't able to access this live. It looks like they're coming through on their students' logins potentially. So I feel like perhaps some of the links and some of the videos might be more useful sent out after the session. That's fine. Okay, if we move on. This was something else that came back in the survey, that some parents weren't aware perhaps of how the GCSEs are structured. So if I really, really quickly run through this, and if this is something you feel like you don't need to know or that you already know, then we'll move through this quite quickly. So there are 2 GCSEs in English that students take. The first one, English language, here on the screen is broken down in this way. So they have 2 exam papers. The first paper is, broadly speaking, a fiction paper. They're asked 4 questions of varying order and of varying number of marks, and they're expected to answer those 4 questions with the reading time in about an hour. In section B is writing and creative or descriptive narrative writing. They're given a stimulus and they're given a choice of a description or narrative. For paper 2, it's broadly speaking a non-fiction paper, and they have one non-fiction extract from the modern day and 1 literary non-fiction text from the 19th century. They're required to compare, and they're required to write about language and the sorts of skills that we've been priming them for over the past 3 years. In section B, they're asked to write an article to present a viewpoint, or a letter, or a speech, or the text for a leaflet. In the past couple of exam seasons, it's been articles, but it may well be a letter, speech, leaflet as well. And our teachers are going through those modes of address. So an hour and 45 minutes exams, they are difficult exams. They are as much to do with timing and judging the marks required and the time allotted, as much as perhaps their ability to write succinctly or to write in detail. So students do need to just be prepared and almost be able to describe to you, this is something helpful perhaps, to describe to you exactly what this exam entails. And if they can do that and tell you the timings and the marks available for each question, then that will give yourselves and the students an amount of confidence. So if we look at language quickly and high tariff questions, so here's an example of the paper 1 question 4, high tariff question, 20 marks. They're given this extract from maybe a novel or a short story, and then they have to respond to something like this. A student said, having read this extract, the woman is right to be angry. She's been treated badly by the shopkeeper. To what extent do you agree with the student? And they use all of the things that they've studied and learnt from probably year 4 or 5 right up until now in terms of how the writer uses methods and how the writer establishes this anger or this clash or this conflict. They can write about structure, they can write about similes and metaphors, and they need to support their answer with well-chosen quotations. It's 20 marks, and in terms of timing, that's 20 to 25 minutes. So they're writing a mini essay effectively in that space of time. Question 4 for paper 2, which is worth 16 marks, non-fiction. They're comparing two sources, as I said before. Maybe both will be on the same topic. For example, the police force. Both extracts are about the police force. Compare the writer's attitudes to the police. So again, using evidence, supporting their ideas with that evidence, and being able to write about methods and how the writer conveys their emotions or their thoughts or their views. And then there's writing sections, as you're aware. For example, an example on the PowerPoint. For paper 1, question 5, either write a story perhaps about a rural place inspired by this picture, describe somewhere beautiful you've visited. So the students are given a choice here. It's either narrative or description. The boundaries between those two things are not that prescriptive, so students would be able to write stories with some description or descriptions with some elements of story. In fact, I would encourage that, but it's worth 40 marks in total, and students need to devote that amount of time, the 45 minutes, roughly 45 minutes time that's available to them. For the equivalent question on paper 2, they're asked to write, for example, an article. They're given a statement that they need to debate. Education should be about more than academic success. It should prepare young people for later life. And that magazine article gives them the opportunity to argue one side or the other. And they should and have been prepared to read and respond to magazine articles over their time at the college so that they understand the conventions and features of article writing. Still too many students begin this kind of topic with something like, I agree with this statement, when that simply isn't how articles begin. I would encourage you, if possible, to sit your son or daughter down with some articles, maybe from a website or a magazine or a newspaper, and just ask them, to deconstruct and think about the way in which writers might present this kind of opinion piece. All right, literature in, again, 2 papers. So paper 1 is Macbeth and Jekyll and Hyde, and paper 2, Inspector Calls, Power and Conflict poetry in an anthology, and then unseen poetry. All right, I'll skip forward so that we can see the typical questions that you might get. For the Macbeth question, they have an extract, and then they're asked to respond to that extract and use the extract as a framework to write about the whole play. So this extract, for example, focuses on Lady Macbeth's ambition and her influence. So students are expected to be able to draw on the extract and then relate it to the rest of the play, perhaps to show how Lady Macbeth's power and ambition corrupts her, and she is on a downward trajectory. And the students don't need tons and tons of quotes to be able to deal with that. They simply need to have a good, clear understanding of the play, its characters and themes, and what happens when, and that will serve them very well and get them a decent grade. Inspector Calls. Jekyll and Hyde is the same extract, and Inspector Calls is a choice of 2 essay questions. There's examples on your screen there now. And again, we need some quotations, but we don't need so many that it's going to become overwhelming. At Parents' Evening last night, I distributed some flashcards, and I do think 10 to 12 quotes per text is plenty. And I'm fairly certain that most of our students have that knowledge already. It just needs to be repeated and revised and refreshed all the time, and now needs to be used within the framework of the essay and the framework of the argument structure that they're going to face. Poetry, 1 printed poem from the collection of 15. Use that poem again as a starting point, and compare that poem with another one of the 14 studied over the course of year 10 and 11. And that comparison is something we're working on in class and will continue to do so. So if I move on now, by the way, if you have any questions, I'm rushing through this a little bit, but if you have any questions at all and you'd like to fire them in, Miss Lacey is here to field those questions, and hopefully at 6:30, if there are a couple of questions that come in from those of you who are joining us live, we can field those then. These are some of the things that I think have proven to work in English, and particularly at home. What I'd like to do with the team between now and the exams is use some of them in class, and to have teachers establish this as a potential routine or something that at least is introduced so you can do this at home. So I have flashcards, and I love flashcards for English, and they work in a number of different ways. And we're going to look quickly at the lightness system and the waterfall system, which is similar. We're going to look at Cornell notes, brain dumps, thinking and linking grids, and teaching others. So there's 6 different strategies that can be used effectively at home, and also in the classroom. But at home, we're looking to maybe do half an hour every night or every other night so that we can consolidate some of the things that they already know, and they do know more perhaps than they think they do. So these are you may have seen these little cards that we've bought, and lots of parents have already got more. Flashcards are brilliant. Doesn't really matter whether you are the day before the exam or you've got 4 months to the exam. I still think that there's value here. So there's 2 different systems that I would recommend with using the flashcards, and the first is called the lightness system. And I apologise if people already know this stuff. I'll make it as specific to English as I can. So over here on this slide, we've got 2 examples of flashcard design, both of which I've seen students use. So in A, with the coloured highlighters and the beautiful handwriting, and the sticky tabs, color-coded sticky tabs, really nice looking, makes me want to read what they've said, and it gives the students a lot of satisfaction, but it's far less effective than B. All right, so I know that B isn't an English example, perhaps a geography example, but we have something short and sweet and precise on one side, and then on the other side we have either an answer or a related concept that simply ties the 2 together. So how tall is Mount Everest, and then an answer. Now in English, what I would suggest you do with flashcards, perhaps literature be a focus here, is the text the student feels less confident with, for let's say it's Jekyll and Hyde, they might have a series of maybe 12 to 20 flashcards with quotations or with interesting, important information about the context. All of this can be gathered from the knowledge organizer, which has deliberately been designed for core knowledge. And on the other side, they can have who said that quote, or where the quote appears, or what the quote means, some kind of development that we want to be able to see, or that the student understands at the moment isn't quite in their long-term memory. So we pick these up and we create the cards, and we'll do some of this in class. Actually, we'll make sure that students have some flashcards ready prepared so they can work with these at home. Here's some other examples for English: 3 key quotes from London. And then on the flip side, on the right-hand side, you can see 3 key quotes from London. You could slim that down to 1 per flashcard as well. What Lady Macbeth first thinks about Macbeth, and then a quotation to suggest or to give the evidence. Okay, so we're pairing those 2 concepts together. What is dramatic irony? What is an oxymoron? There's one that oxymoron one could obviously be used for language or for literature. So what you do in the lightness system is, once you've established your set, so let's say you have a set of 20 cards, you will effectively put your, you will have 5 boxes, and you will move your correctly answered cards along the process. It's very similar to the waterfall method, but with your incorrectly answered cards, you're going to move them and shift them. If you get them wrong, if the student gets them wrong, you're going to keep them in box 1. Or let's say they get it wrong on turn 3, you're going to move it back to box 1. So they're effectively revising box 1 and box 2 and box 3 far more often than box 4 or 5. They're getting the green arrows indicate correct answers, so it's moving towards box 5. When box 5 is filled, it can go back to the start so that they can refresh and revise what we think they already know. All right, so this is simply a system in which we are prioritizing the cards, the quotes, the concepts that are fuzzier than others. You don't need to use boxes, you could use envelopes, you could just use bits of the carpet. It doesn't really matter. Their desk or cups and mugs and things will work just as well. So we just need a system whereby they're revising with space and with distribution, and plugging the gaps that they're finding more difficult to plug. And you might not do this necessarily all in one go. You could do it on a daily basis, or you could structure it so that you do your 20 every day, and then the ones that you are not so confident on, you'll continue in that everyday envelope. The ones that you're getting right becomes a Tuesday and Thursday revision, and then maybe you filter the ones that you're confident out, and they just become Friday. So it's all to do with ratio. If your children are very tech savvy and would prefer to use computers rather than bits of paper or flashcards, then Anki is a brilliant free app. It's one that I've designed a little pack of cards on Anki. So if students are interested, please get them to come and have a chat, and I can provide them links to my set of cards on Anki. Quizlet will do the same sort of thing, not in quite such an intuitive way, but it looks better, and it's free of charge, and you can use that until your heart's content as well. There are pre-prepped Quizlet flashcards for all subjects, not just English as well, all subjects. So like the system, organised, it avoids naive practice, so students tend to practice the things that they know the best already. And it doesn't make any sense, but it seems intuitive that you would revise the things you don't know as well. But that lack of confidence, I suppose, encourages them to stick to the things they're fairly safe with. So if we can get a system going rather than the naive practice that tends to occur, then that's all the better. It's challenging. They get instant feedback without a teacher or a parent being there to give them that. Works in lots of subjects. For English, I would suggest be as precise and simple as you can. English can become really woolly. We just need quotation, explanation, or definition and terminology, those sorts of things. Knowledge organisers. There's a YouTube link if you feel like you need a further explanation. And the waterfall system is very similar, so I won't spend very long on this. But with the waterfall system, you might have a bigger set of cards. You might start with 30 to 50 flashcards, for example, as your starting stack. And the students quite rapidly will go through that starting stack. The flashcards are prepared in the same way as they are for Lightner. And then once you've gone through the starting stack, if you know the answers pretty much straight away, you would put it in the know it pile. If you struggle to remember the answer, then you'll put it in a struggle pile. So you start with effectively just 2 piles. Know it, struggle. Then what you do is you take your struggled pile, the right-hand side, normally you repeat the process. You go back through those cards. It shouldn't be all of them. It should be maybe 3/4. And then the struggled pile will become those that they're still struggling with. So that moves over to the right-hand side. Fewer cards, hopefully, than the starting stack. Second time through, there's now a new know it pile. So we have know it from the first time round, know it 2, and then a struggle. So they move to the right. So it's this idea of the waterfall cascading down. Very similar to Lightner, except here it's kind of unlimited in its flexibility. You keep repeating the process until you've got perhaps 1 to 5 flashcards left in your last struggle pile. So your struggle pile, this on the screen, orange, is effectively is causing them trouble, is causing them a little bit more deep thinking. They're making mistakes. When I learn languages, this is the way that I might learn languages. Now what we do, we go back and we review the flashcards in the pile, but if you answer any cards incorrectly, you need to go through all of them again. It takes a long time, but actually the effort's worth it because, again, it's not naive, it's intuitive, and the effort very much is worth it. I find students quite like this system and they will use it. So get them to use it for English and other subjects and see how the progress is made using this. So at the very end, we go back to the starting stack because we've gone to the right and then back to the left. And then they should know everything on the flashcards. Okay. And again, like Lightner, the process is effective because they're revising the things they're struggling with as much as 10 times more than they are the things that they're not. Okay. Hopefully this is useful, and hopefully these are things that you can try out, and we will try out as well in class in some do nows. So Cornell Notes is perhaps not for everyone, but this is a system of note taking, and students really love. You ask students how they revise for English, what they tend to tell you is they're copying out notes, or they're highlighting, or they're putting things in their own words. And sometimes summarizing can be very powerful, and this is perhaps the most effective way to summarize. You don't want to be highlighting for the sake of it, they want to be summarizing. So you might have, for example, in a Cornell note system, you might have a study guide at home. And the study guide might be looking at a section on Lady Macbeth as a character. So your title on your A4 sheet would be Lady Macbeth as a character. As you go through, you would take your A4 page of lined paper and divide it into sections. And those sections are there: title, key questions, main notes and key thoughts, and at the bottom space for a summary. Right, so it's really reducing content and not making more work for the student. So your title is going to be Lady Macbeth's trajectory or whatever in the play. On the left-hand side, you might start on the left and you might have some what we call either cues or questions. All right, so who is Lady Macbeth might be one, although that's quite vague. How do we first meet Lady Macbeth is much better. All right, so you write that question on the left-hand side, and then the notes written coming from your study guide and coming from the play, and get them to use the play effectively. You need bullet points, 2 or 3 notes that answer that question. All right, so read the section you've chosen, distill it into questions. Even if the textbook or revision guide doesn't provide those questions, the students have to come up with those questions. And in the right-hand side, the notes are written to provide answers to those questions. So this is the system. When you've finished, and this is really, really important, that there's space in a summary at the bottom of the sheet to summarize what you've read. And that's the point where the real deep learning will come, because the Lady Macbeth trajectory in notes in bullet point form might be something that they've done before, but the summary is going to distill it and write it up in a way that is kind of almost exam ready, perhaps. And it'd be really useful if they had some past paper questions by the side as they're doing this, so they can cross-reference it against the sort of questions that come up on a character like Lady Macbeth. Here's one that I did for Sheila in an Inspector Calls. So we have some Q questions on the left-hand side. All of these have come from one of the CGP study guides, I think, and I've literally listed the questions that are answered in the study guide. I will write my notes up, and then I'll summarize Sheila as a character in maybe 5 or 6 sentences at the bottom. The rather inelegantly phrased brain dump, which I've stuck with, even though it's not particularly pleasant to think about, is simply a way of chucking whatever's in their minds that they know, and they know more than they think they do, I'm sure, onto the page. And they can do this in the exam. If they're well prepared and they're primed and they've done this at home in revision, then actually there's no fear in the exam if they spend 3 or 4 minutes doing this before they start. I'd certainly recommend it for literature. So simple, take the topic, take the exam question. They could have an exam question for this, or it could be Sheila or Lady Macbeth, or a poem. And they'd spend, certainly at home, you can spend 10 to 15 minutes writing everything you can on that topic. Don't worry about the order, the expression, the terminology. Try and do some quotations accurately, but make sure that they're effectively reducing the load in their brain. It comes out onto the page, and then when they've completed the brain dump, they would then cross-reference perhaps with the text, add a few more details with a revision guide, or ideally with a study partner who will be able to share their ideas and compare and cross-reference. What they probably want to do then is distill it into maybe their top 5 or 6 points, rather than everything being there ready. Of course, in an exam, I'm not recommending 10 to 15 minutes to do a brain dump, but once they've got good at this, and they've retrieved, this is retrieval practice really, once they've done 3 or 4 minutes, they should then be able to become more automatic when it comes to exam practice. So a brain dump is really effective. Get them to try it with topics and then exam questions. Okay, this two more, and then we'll have a little bit of space for questions if you want to stay online. Thinking and linking grids. Okay, so this was one that was new to me relatively recently, and my classes are going to trial it, but really it's something that can be done at home. So thinking and linking grids is effectively this. Again, we'll use Macbeth as an example. So on the next slide, I'll show you an example grid for Macbeth, and then the instructions of how to do it. This has the feel of a game, but actually it's very, very powerful. So we create a 6x6 grid for whichever topic we're studying, and in this case, the whole play, Macbeth. And we'd agree which items to put in this grid. They might be characters or themes or countries or methods or Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, so that we populate the grid with things that are relevant, either subject or theme. So here's an example of a 6x6 grid, which you could use if you wanted to for Macbeth. So as you can see, then maths is not my subject. 36 different items or ideas, concepts that are found in the play Macbeth. And although I didn't put this together myself, I think all of these are things that we as a department will have taught students. So students should be aware of all of these if you're willing to or want to use this as a trial yourself at home. Okay, so then you need a pair of dice. You roll your dice, and that gives you coordinates. So if you rolled a 3 and a 4, that would equal Macbeth. All right, so we would consider that Macbeth as a character. We would then write how the word or phrase links to the play. For example, if Macbeth comes up for Macbeth, we could talk about his character in broad terms. Loyal soldier at the beginning, corrupted by ambition, falls into a cyclical nature of violence to preserve the power he's pursued. So we're looking at that, and we really want students to be able to talk about hamartia or to talk about hubris, but we don't want them to overdo it to start with. So they have Macbeth, and what they would do is then roll the dice again to find a new word. For example, if they roll a 5 and a 4, the coordinate is hands, then they would be thinking about how the symbol or the motif of hands relates directly to the character of Macbeth. All right, so that will then form something like this on the grid. So you'd have box 1 Macbeth, box 2 hands, and then they would make a detailed connection between the two concepts. All right, and that kind of linking and creating connections between ideas, the schema that builds there is something that can be very, very powerful. And like I keep saying, I think students do know more than they think that they do. They just need the confidence to be able to make these links and connections coherently. And this is one way that I found in the past really works, and certainly going to try it in class and can be tried at home. Very final thing, teaching others. All right, so research on this is pretty clear that students who do the best in English and in many other subjects as well are those who have the opportunity to teach others. I certainly know from my experience that if I'm teaching a new unit or if I'm teaching a new topic or if there's something that I feel less confident in, perhaps if I was teaching out of my subject area, that I could read a lot about it and I could revise it and I could do all those wonderful things. But actually, it's so much more powerful when you teach other people. And I think if we can create those opportunities for students, and we try to do that in the classroom through paired work, for example. But if you can create those opportunities at home, if you're willing to be the student and your child is the teacher, then those can be very, very powerful. For example, I'll give you 3 examples, and then I'll keep quiet if there are any questions at that point. So some ideas are teach a younger sibling, maybe a younger sibling who's going to come up and do all this themselves shortly, what an oxymoron is, and give an example from each set text. So they need to define it, they need to clarify its effect, and they need to give examples. We might say that they read maybe to a younger sibling or to a parent one of the poems that they studied, and that they would then summarize the key themes and support those key themes with quotations. These are things that can be really, really powerful, particularly for students who feel like poetry is a gap. And finally, an idea is to perhaps identify, I like top threes. I like stripping things down to a top three or a top five. Top three most important things Lady Macbeth says in the play, and explain why they're significant. All right, and actually can get a very, very good grade with just somewhere between 3 and 5 quotations, as long as you know how to apply them and be able to say why they have significance or meaning. All right, so done flashcards. We've looked at Lightner and waterfall system. We've talked about grids. We've talked about brain dump. We've talked about Cornell notes and teaching others. Just a quick plug for the English department website. It is got lots and lots of bits and pieces on there. It's worth half an hour, perhaps not for you, but for your children. Just if they haven't visited it before, and I'm convinced lots haven't, just have a look and see what's available. All right, there's lots of articles, for example, on there, and I try and keep those updated regularly. Masolit looks a bit like that. If they don't know how to log on, they log on with their school email address. And it should get them in straight away, but please ask if you can't get on. They're very short, but really, really good. YouTube, we have a YouTube channel in the department. It's got some original content on it from the remote learning days, but it's also got playlists for exam questions from YouTubers and people cooler than me who are able to put together some really, really insightful videos. And my Get Ahead, which is part of the trust, and they're really, really good. There's literally 100 recordings for English now. These are kind of 1 hour lectures, and they don't have to sit there and watch the entire thing. But if they look at the topics, and they're very, very well structured, look at the topics and consider which ones maybe they feel are most pertinent to their revision. After school in English Wednesday, Get Ahead sessions, revision booklets and homework essays. And I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and they said actually the best way for students to do well is to have maximum participation and effort in the classroom, and I'm sure that's the case for those that are attending. But please instill that and encourage that involvement in classroom discussion, and really pushing themselves when they're practicing, because a lot of practice is taking place in class now. Anyway, that's done. Thank you very much indeed. If there are any questions at all, then I'm happy to take those now, or Miss Lacey can. Otherwise, thanks very much, and have a good weekend.